This is my home now." These were the words that came from the bloodied lips of the girl when Jack Morrison found her tangled in barbed wire next to a cracked gravestone in the abandoned Redemption Creek Cemetery. It was 1885, and nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared this Texan cowboy for what he was about to discover. "My name is Elena Vasquez. I'm 18 years old, and I've been dead for 3 days. But this isn't a story about death. It's a story about justice, revenge, and the dark secrets that a small town in West Texas has kept for generations. And if you think you know how this story is going to end, you can be sure you're wrong. If you're enjoying this mystery story, give me a like and let me know in the comments, do you believe in ghosts? Because after this story, you might change your mind. It was a moonless night over the arid plains of Texas. The wind blew hard, carrying the scent of sage and dry earth through the rocky canyon surrounding the small town of Redemption Creek. Jack Morrison, a 35-year-old cowboy with calloused hands and eyes tired from a hard life, was returning from a long journey driving cattle when he decided to take a shortcut through the old cemetery. The Redemption Creek Cemetery had been abandoned for over 10 years, since the town built a new cemetery closer to the church. The gravestones were cracked, overtaken by weeds, and many of the wooden crosses had rotted under the unrelenting Texas sun. It was a place people avoided, especially at night. But Jack wasn't superstitious. At least, he wasn't until that night. His horse, a brown Mustang named Thunder, started to get nervous as they approached the rusty iron gate. The animal whinnied and reared up, its nostrils flaring, sensing something in the air that Jack couldn't feel. "Easy, boy," Jack muttered, patting the horse's neck. "It's just an old cemetery." But when he dismounted to calm Thunder, that's when he saw her. A small figure was huddled against a gravestone at the back of the cemetery, almost invisible in the darkness. At first, it seemed like nothing more than old rags abandoned by the wind. But as Jack approached with his lantern, he saw that it was a young girl, her long black hair spread across the dusty ground. "Miss," he called, running toward her. "Miss, are you all right?" That's when he noticed the barbed wire. It was wrapped around her arms and torso, cutting deep into her pale skin. Dark blood had coagulated in the wounds, staining her torn white dress. Her feet were bare and battered, as if she had run for miles. "Jesus Christ," Jack whispered, kneeling beside her. "Who did this to you?" That's when she opened her eyes. They were an unnatural blue, glowing in the darkness like 2 frozen stars. And when she spoke, her voice had a strange quality, as if it came from very far away. "This is my home now." Jack recoiled, his heart racing. "Miss, you need a doctor. I'll take you to the town." "No," she said, slowly sitting up despite the wounds that should have incapacitated her. "I can't leave this place. Not until the truth is revealed." It was then that Jack read the gravestone behind her. The words were worn by time, but still legible in the lantern light. Elena Vasquez, 1867 to 1885. Died too young. Jack's blood ran cold. This is impossible." Elena smiled, a sad expression that didn't match her 18 years. "Many things are impossible, Mr. Morrison. But that doesn't stop them from happening." "How do you know my name?" Jack stammered, his hand instinctively reaching for the revolver at his hip. "I know many things now," she replied, standing gracefully despite the barbed wire still wrapped around her arms. "I know you're a good man. I know your conscience keeps you awake at night. And I know you're the only person in this town who can help me." Jack looked around the deserted cemetery, trying to process what was happening. The wind had completely stopped, leaving an unnatural silence. Even thunder had calmed down, as if the very air had changed. "You're dead," he said, more to himself than to her. Yes, Elena simply confirmed. Murdered 3 days ago by men who thought they could bury the truth with me. Folks, I know this is sounding impossible, but stick with me because this story is about to get even darker. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Elena began to walk among the gravestones, the barbed wire unwinding from her arms by itself and falling to the ground with a metallic sound. Where she had been injured, the skin started to heal before Jack's eyes, leaving only pale marks. I was the daughter of a miner, she began, her voice strangely echoing in the silent cemetery. My father, Miguel Vasquez, found something in the hills north of the town. Something that certain powerful men in Redemption Creek didn't want discovered. What? Jack asked, still trying to accept that he was having a conversation with a ghost. Gold, Mr. Morrison. A lot of gold. But it wasn't the gold that mattered. Elena stopped in front of a larger gravestone, touching the stone reverently. It was what my father found along with the gold. Bones. Many bones. And personal items that proved innocent people had been murdered and buried in that mine. Jack felt a chill run down his spine. Redemption Creek had a reputation as a peaceful town, but he had always felt there was something dark beneath the surface. Many people had simply disappeared over the years. Who? He asked. Sheriff Clayton Murdoch. Banker Theodore Whitman. Mayor Samuel Cross. Elena turned to face him, her eyes glowing with a cold light. And Judge William Harrison, who was supposed to represent justice in this town. Jack knew all those names. They were the most respected and powerful men in Redemption Creek. The idea that they could be murderers seemed impossible. My father tried to do the right thing, Elena continued. He brought the evidence to the sheriff, trusting the law. He didn't know he was handing the proof of their own crimes to the very criminal. What happened to your father? They killed him that same night. Made it look like a mining accident. But I saw everything. Tears began to fall from Elena's face, shining like silver in the darkness. I was hiding in the rocks when they arrived. I saw Sheriff Murdoch hang my father and then dynamite the entrance to the mine. Jack felt nausea rising in his stomach. And you? I ran. I ran for 3 days through the hills, trying to reach the neighboring town to tell the authorities. But they found me. Elena touched her own neck, where Jack now saw fading purple marks. They brought me back. They tortured me. They wanted to know if I'd told anyone, if I'd hidden any evidence anywhere. And did you? Elena smiled mysteriously. That's the million-dollar question, isn't it, Mr. Morrison? The wind began to blow again, carrying the distant sound of horse hooves. Elena raised her head, her senses seemingly sharper than any living person's. They come here every night, she whispered. To make sure I'm dead. To make sure their secrets are buried with me. Folks, are you feeling the tension? Because I'm getting chills just telling this story. Jack looked toward the sound and saw lantern lights approaching the cemetery. 3 riders were coming toward them, and even in the darkness, he recognized the silhouettes of Sheriff Murdoch and his men. They can't see me, can they? He asked quickly. Not if I don't want them to, Elena replied. But you, Mr. Morrison, you have a choice. You can mount your horse and leave, pretend you never saw me. Go back to your simple, safe life. Jack looked at her, at the 18-year-old girl who had died seeking justice, and then at the men approaching, men he had respected and trusted. Or, he asked. Elena smiled, and for the first time, she didn't look sad. She looked dangerous. Or you help me make them pay for what they've done. You help me prove that Elena Vasquez isn't going to stay quiet in her grave while murderers rule this town. The lights were getting closer. Jack had to decide now. If I agree, he said slowly, what exactly do you want me to do? Elena raised her hand, and the barbed wire on the ground began to move on its own, wrapping into intricate patterns. First, we need to recover the evidence my father hid. Then, we need to make them confess their crimes. And if they don't confess? Elena's eyes shone with a supernatural light. Then they'll find out there are worse things than death, Mr. Morrison. Jack Morrison was a practical man. He didn't believe in ghosts, divine justice, or second chances after death. But looking at Elena Vasquez, seeing the determination in her eyes even after death, he made the most important decision of his life. Tell me what I need to do. What do you think Elena has planned for her revenge? And did Jack get himself involved in something much bigger than he realizes? Leave your theories in the comments and don't miss the next chapter. Elena vanished the moment the lanterns of the riders illuminated the cemetery. 1 second she was there, pale and ethereal in the moonlight, and the next, she had dissolved like mist, leaving only the echo of her voice in the wind. Meet me at the mine at dawn. Jack quickly mounted Thunder, pretending to be merely crossing the cemetery. His heart hammered against his ribs as Sheriff Murdoch and 2 deputies approached. Morrison! Clayton Murdoch's harsh voice cut through the night. What the hell are you doing here? Good evening, Sheriff, Jack replied, trying to keep his voice steady. I was coming back from the McCormick Ranch and decided to take a shortcut. Murdoch was a big man, about 45 years old, with a graying beard and scars on his face that spoke of a violent life. His small, dark eyes studied Jack with suspicion. A shortcut through the cemetery? At midnight? Murdoch spat on the ground. That doesn't sound like you, Morrison. Thunder got spooked by something on the main hills, Jack lied. I preferred to come this way than risk a fall in the dark. The deputies, the Garrett brothers, known for their brutality, flanked Jack, their hands resting on their revolver handles. Did you see anything strange around here? Asked Tom Garrett, the older of the two. Folks, imagine the tension. Jack just spoke to a ghost and now he's face to face with her killers. If you're on the edge of your seat, give me a like. Strange how? Jack asked cautiously. People reported disturbances, Murdoch said, dismounting his horse. Strange lights, sounds. Superstitious nonsense, but best to check. Jack watched the 3 men scouring the cemetery with their lanterns. They stopped exactly where Elena had been, where Jack could swear there were still droplets of blood on the ground. But when Murdoch lowered his lantern, there was nothing there. It's clean, the sheriff muttered. Probably just coyotes. But Jack noticed how Murdoch's hand trembled slightly as he held the lantern, how his eyes kept scanning the shadows between the gravestones. These men were scared. And people who had committed the crimes Elena described had good reason to fear the dead. Well, if you didn't see anything. Jack started to move away. Morrison, Murdoch called. A word of advice. People who get too curious sometimes end up getting involved in problems they can't solve. You understand me? The threat was clear as crystal. Jack nodded and rode off, but not before seeing Murdoch pull a small whiskey bottle from his vest and take a long, desperate swig. At dawn, Jack was in the hills north of the town, following the vague directions Elena had whispered before disappearing. The Vasquez mine was hidden in a rocky canyon, its entrance blocked by debris from an explosion. Mr. Morrison. Jack turned and saw Elena emerging from the shadows between the rocks. In the daylight, she looked different, more solid, but also more obviously dead. Her skin had an unnatural pallor, and when she moved, she seemed to float a few inches above the ground. How did you do that last night? Jack asked. Disappear like that? Death has its privileges, Elena answered with a melancholic smile. But also its limitations. I can only appear between sunset and sunrise. During the day, I'm more ethereal. As if to prove her point, her hand passed through a rock when she tried to touch it. So how are we going to move this debris? Jack gestured to the blocked entrance. We don't need to. Elena pointed to a narrow crack in the canyon wall, almost invisible to the naked eye. There's a back entrance. My father showed it to me when I was a child. Jack followed Elena through the crack, which widened into a natural tunnel. The temperature dropped drastically as they went deeper into the mountain, and Jack had to light a torch. Folks, imagine the courage Jack has to follow a ghost into an abandoned mine. Would you do it? Comment below. The tunnel opened into a huge cavern. But what Jack saw there made him choke in horror. Skeletons. Dozens of them, scattered across the cave floor in various states of decomposition. Some still wore decayed clothes, others had chains on their wrists. And among the bones, pieces of gold gleamed in the torchlight. My God, Jack whispered. Chinese workers, mostly, Elena explained, her voice oddly echoing in the cavern. Brought into work on the railroad and then discarded. Some Mexican miners too. Anyone who could have found this place. Jack knelt beside a skeleton still wearing a faded work shirt. In the pocket, he found a letter written in Chinese and a small photo of a family. How long has this been going on? 15 years at least, Elena replied. Maybe more. They brought people into work, promised them payment and citizenship. Instead, they killed them and kept the gold they found. Jack stood up, feeling nauseous. How many people know about this? Now? Only the 4 men who killed me. And you. Elena floated toward the back of the cavern. But my father hid something here before he died. Something that can prove everything. On the far wall of the cavern, Elena pointed to a pile of rocks that looked natural, but Jack realized it had been carefully arranged. Can you move those rocks? Elena asked. Jack worked for almost an hour, moving rocks until he revealed a small opening. Inside, wrapped in oiled leather, was a detailed accounting book and a collection of personal items, rings, watches, letters. My father documented everything, Elena explained as Jack flipped through the book. Names, dates, how much gold each victim found before being killed. He even got some documents signed by the murderers themselves. Jack studied the pages. Miguel Vasquez's careful handwriting had meticulously recorded each crime. There were fake contracts signed by Theodore Whitman from the bank, forged execution orders with Judge Harrison's seal, and even a map showing where other bodies were buried. This is enough to hang them all, Jack murmured. It would be, if there were honest authorities to deliver it to, Elena said bitterly. But the sheriff, the judge, the mayor, they're all involved. Where would you take this evidence? Jack had no answer to that. Redemption Creek was isolated enough that these 4 authority figures completely controlled local justice. So what do we do? He asked. Elena smiled, and this time there was something chillingly sinister in her expression. We make our own justice. At that moment, the sound of hooves echoed from the canyon outside. Elena turned sharply, her eyes glowing with alarm. They followed us, she whispered. How is that possible? Jack asked, but Elena was dissolving quickly as the sun rose higher. Hide the evidence, she said, her voice growing distant. And trust me, Jack Morrison. Tonight, Redemption Creek will learn that the dead tell secrets. Elena disappeared completely, leaving Jack alone in the cave of the dead as hostile voices echoed from the tunnel. I know you're in there, Morrison. Murdoch's voice shouted. Come out with your hands up. Jack quickly hid the accounting book inside his jacket and took only a few of the most incriminating personal items. If he was captured, at least part of the evidence would survive. I'm coming out, he shouted back, walking slowly toward the tunnel. Murdoch was waiting at the entrance with Tom Garrett and 3 other armed men. The sheriff held a shotgun pointed directly at Jack's chest. How convenient to find you here, Morrison, Murdoch said, his small eyes gleaming with malice. Right at the side of an old mining accident. I was exploring, Jack said simply. Exploring? Murdoch laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. Or maybe looking for something specific? Maybe something a certain Mexican miner might have hidden? Jack kept his expression neutral, but his heart raced. How did Murdoch know about Miguel Vasquez and the mine? Folks, Jack is in an impossible situation. How do you think he's going to get out of this? Leave your guesses in the comments. I don't know what you're talking about, Jack lied. Murdoch moved closer, pressing the barrel of the shotgun against Jack's chest. You know, Morrison, you've always seemed like a smart man. Too smart for your own good. Sheriff, Tom Garrett intervened, maybe we should take him back to town for a proper interrogation. Interrogate? Murdoch smiled coldly. Oh, Tom, you've always been too civilized. No, I think Mr. Morrison here had a tragic mining accident. Just like Miguel Vasquez. Jack saw his death in the sheriff's eyes. These men weren't going to risk leaving him alive, not after he had found the mine. Then the wind stopped. Completely. The supernatural silence that followed made all the men look around nervously. And then, impossible in the clear light of morning, Elena Vasquez appeared. She materialized directly behind Murdoch, pale as death but solid enough for everyone to see her clearly. Her white dress fluttered in a breeze that didn't exist, and her blue eyes glowed with a cold inner light. Sheriff Clayton Murdoch, she said, her voice strangely echoing in the canyon. You killed my father. You killed me. And now you will pay. Murdoch slowly turned around, the shotgun trembling in his hands. His face had lost all color. You're dead, he stammered. Yes, Elena confirmed, beginning to walk toward him. But death didn't stop me from coming back to seek justice. The other men started to retreat, their guns pointing ineffectively at a creature that clearly didn't belong to the world of the living. This is impossible, whispered Tom Garrett. Elena smiled, an expression that was nothing human. You've spent so much time creating impossibilities, Mr. Garrett. 15 years killing innocents and thinking you'd never pay for it. Well, some impossibles finally showed up to visit you. And then, to the utter horror of the armed men, Elena began to multiply. Other ghostly figures emerged from the rocks around, half-visible skeletons of Chinese workers, spirits of dead Mexican miners, all the dead from the mine rising to face their killers. Run, Jack whispered to himself, but the men were already in full panic, stumbling over each other in their desperate rush to escape the canyon. Murdoch was the last to leave, shouting something about demons and curses as he galloped away. Elena turned to Jack, and for a moment she was just the 18-year-old girl who had died seeking justice. Tonight, she said softly, we'll finish this. End of chapter 2. Wow! Elena is more powerful than we imagined. Do you think the ghosts of the mine will be able to bring justice? And what does Elena have planned for tonight? When the sun set over Redemption Creek that night, the town itself seemed to hold its breath. Jack Morrison stood on the hotel porch, watching the empty streets and feeling an unnatural chill in the air, despite the typical Texas summer heat. Elena appeared by his side like a shadow, more solid than he had seen her before. Her blue eyes glowed with a supernatural intensity, and when she spoke, her voice carried echoes of ancient voices, the voices of the dead. Tonight, they will confess everything, she said, looking at the sleeping town. Every life they took, every dream they destroyed, every family they shattered. How? Jack asked. Elena smiled, and the barbed wire began to materialize around her fists like deadly jewels. You will witness, Jack Morrison. And when dawn comes, you will tell the world what you saw. Folks, get ready because tonight is going to be intense. Leave a like if you're excited to see these criminals pay. The first was Theodore Whitman, the banker. Jack followed Elena through the silent streets to Whitman's three-story mansion in the rich part of town. The 50-year-old man was in his private office, drinking brandy and counting piles of gold coins, gold that had been taken from the bodies of the dead. "How are we going to get in?" Jack whispered. Elena didn't answer. She simply walked through the front wall as if it were mist. Jack had to use the back door, which he found mysteriously unlocked. When he entered the office, Whitman was standing, his back to the door, completely still. Elena was standing in front of him, her eyes fixed on his. "Theodore Whitman," she said, her voice echoing with supernatural authority. "You stole more than gold. You stole lives." Whitman tried to speak, but no sound came out. His face was pale with terror, beads of sweat dripping down his forehead despite the cold that had overtaken the room. Wanly, Elena continued, and the air around her began to glow with a cold blue light. 22 years old, came from China to build the railroad. You promised to pay his wages, but instead, you took him to the mine and killed him for 3 gold nuggets. A translucent figure appeared next to Elena, the ghost of a young Chinese man in work clothes, his eyes fixed on Whitman with silent accusation. "No," Whitman finally managed to whisper. "Jose Martinez," Elena continued, and another ghost materialized. "Father of 4 children, came from Mexico looking for a better life. You forged bank documents to steal his discoveries and then ordered his death. Please," Whitman begged, falling to his knees. "Miguel Santos, Carlos Rivera, Tommy Chin, David Huang." With each name, another ghost appeared in the room, until Whitman was surrounded by more than a dozen vengeful spirits. Imagine the terror Whitman is feeling. Every life he destroyed is now standing before him demanding justice. "Confess," Elena ordered, and her voice carried the weight of all the dead. "Confess every crime, every life you took, every family you destroyed." And Theodore Whitman confessed. For an entire hour, he detailed 15 years of murders, thefts, and corruption, his voice breaking as the ghosts watched him. Jack wrote down every word in a notebook, his hands trembling as he recorded horrors that went beyond his worst imagination. When he finished, Elena nodded to the ghosts, who moved toward Whitman. The banker screamed once before passing out. "He will live," Elena told Jack as they left the mansion. "But he will never sleep without seeing their faces." The next was Mayor Samuel Cross. Cross was in his small but well-furnished house, trying to burn documents in his fireplace when Elena appeared in the flames. The 60-year-old man recoiled, stumbling and falling to the floor as Elena emerged from the fire without being burned. "Destroying evidence, Mayor Cross?" she asked, walking through the flames as if they were nothing. "What a pity. The dead have much better memories than paper." Cross tried to crawl away, but barbed wire appeared out of nowhere, wrapping around his ankles and dragging him back. "Elena Vasquez," he stammered, recognizing her. "You should be dead." "I am dead," she confirmed, kneeling beside him. "You helped me die, remember? You held my arms while the sheriff strangled me." The barbed wire began to tighten, and Cross groaned in pain. "You were the one who had the idea to use immigrant workers," Elena continued. "They had no family here, no one to ask about them. No one to look for them when they disappeared. It was just business," Cross whined. "Business?" The temperature in the room plummeted until steam was coming from their mouths. Xiao Wei had a pregnant wife in China. Pablo Morales was saving money to bring his children. Antonio Silva was sending every penny to his sick mother. With each name, Elena became more solid, more terrifying. Her form began to split, showing how she had died, bruised, bloodied, but incredibly determined. "To you, it was business," she hissed. "To them, it was hope. And you destroyed it all." Cross confessed as well, detailing how he had used his position to lure workers to the town with false promises, how he had forged death records to cover up the murders. Folks, each confession is revealing a web of corruption that goes way beyond what we imagined. Comment if you think the next villain will be even worse. Judge William Harrison was found in his office at the courthouse, drinking directly from a bottle of whiskey and murmuring incoherent prayers. "Prayers won't save you, Judge Harrison," Elena said, appearing seated in his judge's chair. "Not when you've perverted justice itself." Harrison was a large man, 65 years old, with white hair and a reputation for severe fairness. But when he saw Elena, he began to cry like a child. "I didn't want to," he sobbed. "They forced me. They said they would kill my family if I didn't cooperate." "Your family," Elena repeated, and her voice carried a deep sadness. "You saved your family by condemning dozens of others to death." Documents began to fly on their own around the office, false sentences, forged execution orders, decisions that had sent innocent men to their deaths. "Li Wei Chen," Elena said, and the papers stopped flying, magically organizing themselves on the desk. 20 years old, falsely accused of theft. You sentenced him to death knowing he was innocent. He didn't die." Harrison protested desperately. I warned him. Told him to flee." "He fled," Elena confirmed. "Straight into the mine, where Murdoch was waiting for him." The truth hit Harrison like a bullet. He had thought he was saving at least some lives, but in reality, he had been sending them straight to their murderers. Elena floated toward him, and when she touched his forehead, Harrison saw everything, each victim, each moment of death, 15 years of horror through the eyes of the dead. His confession was the longest and most detailed, revealing how the entire legal system had been corrupted to serve the murderers. When they left the courthouse, Elena turned to Jack. "Only one left." Jack looked at the sheriff's office, where a single light still burned in the window. "Murdoch," he said. "Clayton Murdoch," Elena confirmed, and for the first time since returning from death, Jack saw real emotion in her eyes. "The man who held the rope that killed me." They walked slowly through the empty streets, but as they approached the sheriff's office, Elena began to change. Her form became darker, more terrifying. The barbed wire around her fists began to bleed, and her eyes turned into two holes of cold blue light. "Elena," Jack said cautiously, "are you still you?" She stopped, looking at him with an expression that blended the 18-year-old girl she had been with something much older and more relentless. "I am Elena Vasquez," she said, and her voice echoed with the weight of all the dead. "I am justice. I am revenge. And I am the nightmare that Clayton Murdoch will carry to his grave." The sheriff's office was dark except for a flickering candle on the sheriff's desk. Murdoch was sitting, compulsively cleaning his revolver, as if the gun could protect him from supernatural forces. "He knows we're coming," Jack murmured. Elena smiled, an expression that was nothing human. "Perfect. Fear tempers the confession." When they entered, Murdoch raised his revolver with trembling hands. "Stay away from me, demon." "I'm not a demon, Sheriff," Elena said, walking slowly toward him. "I'm something worse. I am the truth." Murdoch fired. The bullet passed straight through Elena without any effect. She kept approaching while he emptied the chamber, each shot useless against a force that was beyond death. "My name is Elena Vasquez," she said, and her voice now carried echoes of all the victims. "And you, Clayton Murdoch, will tell me exactly how this all started." Folks, the final confession is here. What do you think Murdoch will reveal? Is there something even worse behind all of this? Leave your guesses in the comments. And then, with Elena looming over him like an avenging angel of death, Clayton Murdoch began to speak. And what he revealed was much worse than anyone had imagined. The night of the trials was intense. But it seems that Redemption Creek's secrets are even darker than we thought. What do you think Murdoch will reveal? Clayton Murdoch collapsed into his chair, the empty revolver falling from his trembling hands. Elena stood before him now, no longer looking like an 18-year-old girl, but like a force of nature, ancient, relentless, fueled by the fury of 15 years of injustice. "Do you want to know the truth?" Murdoch laughed, a broken, desperate sound. "You think we're just four greedy men in a small town? Oh, dead little girl, you have no idea what you've uncovered." Jack felt a chill run down his spine. There was something in Murdoch's voice, a resignation that hinted at even darker secrets. "Then tell me," Elena said, her voice carrying echoes of all the victims. "Tell me everything. Folks, get ready because what comes next will change everything we thought about this story. Leave that like if you're prepared for the shocking truth." Murdoch stared at Elena for a long moment, then began to laugh, a harsh, humorless sound that echoed through the empty sheriff's office. "Redemption Creek is just a station, Elena. A small gear in a much bigger machine." He leaned forward, his red eyes from drink and insomnia fixed on hers. "You think we kept this secret for 15 years alone? That we made this operation up out of nowhere?" "Go on," Elena ordered, and the barbed wire around her fists began to glow with an ominous light. "The Civil War may have ended in 1865, but there are men in the government, powerful men, who never accepted defeat," Murdoch continued. "They needed gold, a lot of gold, to fund projects. Projects that the official government would never approve." Jack felt his blood run cold. "What kind of projects?" "Weapons. Mercenaries. Plans to restore the Confederacy," Murdoch spat. "We weren't just stealing gold, Morrison. We were funding a second civil war." Elena grew dangerously still. When she spoke, her voice was low like the distant rumble of a storm. "How many towns?" "A dozen," Murdoch admitted. "Maybe more. Small border towns where immigrant workers could disappear without questions. Where local sheriffs could be bought or persuaded." "My God," Jack whispered. "Hundreds of people." "Thousands," Murdoch corrected bitterly. "And you know what's the worst part? It worked. For 15 years, it worked perfectly. Until your father stuck his nose where it didn't belong." Elena moved closer to him, and the temperature in the room dropped so low that steam came from Murdoch's mouth when he spoke. "Who?" she asked. "Who are the men behind this?" Murdoch hesitated, and Elena extended her hand. When her ghostly fingers touched his forehead, he screamed as if burned by a branding iron. "General Marcus Stone," he cried. "Colonel Richard Hayes. Senator James Crawford. They have agents all over the territory." Elena withdrew her hand, and Murdoch collapsed, breathing heavily. "And when my father found evidence of this," Elena said, not as a question, but as a statement. "Stone personally ordered his death," Murdoch confirmed. "He said it was a matter of national security. That some sacrifices were necessary for the greater good." Folks, imagine the outrage. Elena discovered that her family's death was part of a military conspiracy to overthrow the government. "This is much bigger than anyone imagined." Elena moved away from Murdoch, walking toward the sheriff's office window. Outside, Jack could see other ethereal figures gathering in the streets, more ghosts from the mine, but now many more of them. Ghosts from other towns, other victims, all drawn by the revelation of the truth. "How long have you known about this?" Elena asked without turning. "Since the beginning," Murdoch admitted. "Stone personally recruited me in 1870. Promised that when the new Confederacy rose, I would be rewarded with land and titles." "And you believed him?" Murdoch laughed bitterly. "I wanted to believe. The Civil War destroyed my family, my land. Stone offered me the chance to rebuild everything." Elena turned, and Jack saw silver tears streaming down her face, not tears of sadness, but of pure fury made visible. 15 years, she whispered. 15 years of murders, all to fund a war that was already lost. "The war never ended!" Murdoch shouted, suddenly rising. "The North may have won the battles, but the soul of the South was never defeated. Stone and the others, they're going to. His voice cut off as Elena fully turned to face him. She no longer looked human. Her form shimmered with a cold blue light, and when she spoke, it was with the voice of thousands of the dead. Clayton Murdoch, she said, and the very walls of the sheriff's office began to tremble. You killed innocents to fund a lost cause. You destroyed families to enrich men who never cared about you. You are a fool and a murderer. No! Murdoch drew a knife from his boot. I won't die at the hands of a ghost. He lunged at Elena, but the blade passed straight through her. Elena smiled, a terrible and final expression. You won't die, Clayton Murdoch. That would be far too merciful. She touched his forehead again, and this time, she didn't withdraw her hand. Murdoch screamed, a sound that echoed through the empty streets and made the horses in the stable rear in terror. You will live, Elena said, as Murdoch convulsed. But every day, every night, you will see the faces of everyone you killed. You will hear their screams. You will feel their pain. And you will never, never forget. When she withdrew her hand, Murdoch was alive, but something had broken irreparably in his eyes. He stared into empty corners as if seeing invisible horrors. Folks, this vengeance was intense. But it's not over yet. Elena has bigger plans than just punishing 4 men in a small town. Elena turned to Jack, and gradually, her appearance became more human again, still clearly a ghost, but recognizable as the young woman she had been. Jack Morrison, she said, now you know the full truth. What will you do with it? Jack looked at the accounting book in his hands, heavy with evidence of crimes that spanned far beyond Redemption Creek. I'll tell the world, he said. I'll take this evidence to Washington, to the newspapers, to any honest authority I find. And if they try to stop you? If they send more men like Murdoch? Jack looked at the ghosts gathered in the streets, at Elena glowing with supernatural power, and smiled. Then they'll find out that the dead have allies among the living. Elena nodded, satisfied. The truth has a way of spreading, Jack Morrison. Like fire on the prairie, impossible to contain once it starts. She began to fade with the approach of dawn, but her voice remained clear. This town is clean now. But there are other towns, other victims waiting for justice. And as long as there's injustice. She smiled, an expression that promised terrible retribution to anyone who harmed the innocent. The dead will keep rising. 6 months later. Jack Morrison stood on the balcony of the Washington Herald newspaper, watching the first copies of his exposé come off the printer. The headline occupied the entire front page, "The Confederate Conspiracy, How Defeated Generals Funded 15 Years of Murders." Thanks to the meticulous evidence of Miguel Vasquez and the confessions Jack had recorded, 3 senators had resigned, 2 generals were facing court-martial, and a dozen border towns were under investigation. Mr. Morrison? A young reporter approached. There are rumors that other towns are reporting strange phenomena. Ghostly apparitions, spontaneous confessions from local authorities. Do you think there's a connection to your investigation? Jack smiled, recalling Elena's final words. I think the truth has a way of spreading, miss. And sometimes, when common justice fails, older forces intervene. That night, when Jack returned to his hotel, he found a single white rose on his desk, a sign that Elena was watching, that other vengeful ghosts were rising in other towns, and that the network of corruption and murder was finally being dismantled. In the mirror of his room, for just a moment, Jack saw the reflection of Elena Vasquez. She waved once, smiled, and then disappeared forever, finally at peace, knowing justice had triumphed. But in small towns across the American West, other spectral figures began to appear, confronting other men with blood on their hands, ensuring the dead would never be forgotten and that the truth would always find a way into the light. And so ends the story of Elena Vasquez and the town of Redemption Creek. But remember, in a world where injustice prevails, the dead have a way of coming back to balance the scales. Thank you for following this journey. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe there's justice beyond death? If you enjoyed this supernatural tale of revenge and justice, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and let me know what other mystery stories you'd like to see. Until next time, folks.